Good evening. I thought I'd try something really different tonight for our prayer meeting message from Job chapter 37. I'm here in New Hampshire at my daughter's home, our family. Behind me you see the pond that they like to play in and swim in and do things in. Today it's an unusually warm day. I think it's warmer than it is in Illinois, in fact. And so I thought I'd sit here. If you hear chickens or ducks, that's because I'm right in front of the chicken uh, cage and pen that they have. And if it's a little windy, I'll have to apologize for that too, but I thought it'd be fun just to do it this way for a change. Just to have something different to see tonight. It's March 31st. In fact, tomorrow begins April. We have tonight a lesson from the book of Job. The idea is that God is still in control. It's interesting to note that Ronald Reagan was shot by John Hinckley in 1981. In the melee that followed, confusion reigned at the White House. The burning question was, who was actually in charge? George Bush, the vice president then, he was not around, was not present. At that point, Alexander Haig, the Secretary of State, the former military leader of NATO, took it upon himself to fill the leadership vacuum. Stepping in front of the live television camera, Haig uttered those now famous words, "As of this moment, I am in charge here." But he was wrong. The Secretary of State is not in charge when the President and Vice President cannot fulfill their duties. It would actually have been the leader of the House. But he grabbed the control and wanted to help people understand that our government was still functioning. Sometimes we don't understand that God is in control, even when things look like He's not. We need to recognize that God is control, and Elihu, in this last part of his speech, gives us several areas in which he demonstrates God is in control. He says in these first 5 verses, he talks about God controlling the electrical storm. He unleashes his lightning, the roar of his voice, and the rumbling of a thunderstorm as well. He releases his thunder. Elihu was telling us that God is in control in a lightning and thunderstorm. He compares the thunder to God's majestic voice, that God holds nothing back. Such a display of power like that is beyond our comprehension. We can't produce it ourselves without the help of enormous loudspeakers or whatever. But God does have control of the electrical storm. God is in control. We find, secondly, he talks about God being in control in a snowstorm. We might know better about that in Illinois than we would know in other places. But we recognize that God is in control of the snowstorm. Elihu shifts his voice here to that of winter. He shifts it to that of a cold snowstorm. He tells us in verse 6 that God commands the snowstorm. God says to the snow, fall on the earth, and the snow obeys. He controls the rain, be a mighty downpour, but God exercises his power, his infinite power, over creation. You and I do not have that power. You and I are sometimes helpless in a storm. We might not even understand what a storm is. We might not understand how a storm can be created. Right now, today, it's very warm, unusually warm here in New Hampshire. I think we're in the 60s. I think I checked my thermostat at home on our Nest, and it said outside was 43. So it's very unusual that we in New Hampshire, in New England, would have a warmer temperature than in Pekin or Peoria or Elmwood, Illinois does. Any of those towns in Illinois are colder than here. But we know that God does control the weather. He controls, as Elihu describes it here, he controls the snow. He channels the snow in verses 7 and 8. A snowfall, or even a heavy rain, can stop a man from working. It stops children from having school. Although nowadays, because of the pandemic, we do have the ability to switch to remote, which is why the schools I'm connected to with driving the bus have not had any snow days and probably will not have them. Even if it does snow, which would be a little unusual in April, but not unheard of. He controls the snow, he channels it. He shows us by that channeling of the snowstorm that man is dependent on God. We might think we can control the weather somewhat. We might think we can control the circumstances, that we can do whatever we want to do, but God ultimately is in control. In Texas this late winter, they found out for sure that God channels the snow and the ice and caused them to suffer greatly for several weeks. Man has to take cover during this inclement weather. We find that God controls the cold. In verses 9, he talks about the tempest comes out from its chamber and God's omnipotence is shown. As the blistering cold from the driving wind, it's windy here. I hope you don't hear it too much on this recording, but God controls the cold. And he creates ice in verse 10. The breath of God is a metaphor for chilling wind that produces ice, and the broad waters, the streams and rivers, result from the precipitation coming. The frozen conditions of the cold winter reminded Job that the painful seasons of life are directed by God, ultimately for man's good. We find also that God controls the rainstorm. As was previously mentioned somewhat, God loads the clouds with moisture. He scatters his lightning through them, and he empties those same clouds. Elihu showed to Job a good knowledge of meteorology, in fact, understanding how the rain came. It was not until later in modern times that we understood the water cycle. How water evaporates from the earth, goes up into the clouds condense on dust particles sometimes, and the rain comes back down, or the snow, or the ice, even hail sometimes. God controls here, though. He's talking about the rainstorm. He fills and drains those clouds by his command. At his direction, they swirl around in the skies to do whatever he commands. Sometimes they even form tornadoes, or perhaps hurricanes down by the ocean. God is in control of the rain. The directing of these storms is purposeful, never random. God uses them sometimes to produce a great harvest for man, sometimes to cause man to depend on him by causing destruction through the storms, sometimes perhaps even to punish, although not necessarily always, when a storm hits and causes destruction on the earth. But God controls the rain clouds. He fills them. He fills them with water. He sends the clouds to us and the winds that come with them. Elihu suggested that this, as in rain and the clouds, was only for a season. It did not last forever. We find also he uses the clouds. He uses them to punish or to reward. He brings the clouds to show man his love as he nourishes the earth, as he gives us the water that we desperately need. God controls the rainstorm. We find fourthly that God controls all storms. In verse 14, he shines in nature. He should stop and consider. God works his wonders on earth and nature. He sends the lightning. Lightning, in fact, helps the earth sometimes when it strikes and changes the ground and into usable nutrients. Lightning in the nature gets rid of dead trees and things that shouldn't be around. Lightning clears the air. It does a lot of things. Job did not fully understand how God could control the lightning, how God could produce it even, and yet Elihu urged him to consider, to recognize that God controls all storms. He shines in nature. He gives us the sun to nourish our plants and our crops and our trees. He sends the lightning. And then sometimes God suspends the clouds. He could see the clouds overhead. He could experiencing their buffeting and blessing, but understand them. Job, with his finite mind, could not understand what God was doing in the clouds. But God does control all storms. We find that God spreads the skies, Elihu said. Do you swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind? Job baked under the summer sun and the sirocco that blew from the desert. Elihu's asked him, can you join God in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? A bronze mirror-like sky pictures sweltering, summering heat. Job did not understand how God created that. He didn't understand how God controlled it, and certainly he himself could not spread the skies either. Elihu then kind of gathers all this together at the end of this chapter and mentions that God controls life's storms. Here he's focusing the point of the weather to Job's condition. Elihu tells Job that man could not present his case before God. This is because man lives in the dark about God's ways. Elihu challenged him to say, what would he say if he were to talk to God? We cannot draw up our case because of our darkness. Job lived in a world that was foreign to him and different as the heaven and the skies were to him, so was God to Job in his life as well. Man is in the dark about the mystery of God's providence. Yes, God leads us. God uses even the storm sometimes to determine our course of action. And yet, we cannot say exactly why God does what he does. We do not know God's ultimate purpose for our life, but we do know that God is leading us. And we need to recognize that. Should God be told that man wanted to speak with him, man would be swallowed up. As Moses was commanded to take his shoes off because God was holy. As his face could not even be looked at when he just saw the passing glimpse of God on Mount Sinai. God is way far above what anything we can think of or imagine. Our God is wonderful. Our God is beyond our human comprehension. We cannot think what God is compared to us. And yet, Elihu is telling Job, even though you cannot approach God and you cannot comprehend God, we think of God and see the splendor of God Almighty, we have to recognize that we need to be in awe of God. God is someone that we worship, that we trust, that we turn over our lives to. We know that God is in control. We know that God loves us. We know that God has our best interests in mind. We cannot say that about other people in our lives sometimes. Those that we truly love and trust, we can. But even then, we do not know if they even know what's best for us. How many times have you seen a parent, or especially a grandparent, and I'm guilty here myself, we don't always do what's best for our children or grandchildren because we love them so much and we want them to have so much. We want them to have everything that they would desire. And yet sometimes that's not the best thing for them. They do need to learn responsibility. They need to learn to earn their way in life so that when they become an adult, they still don't expect everything to be handed to them. We, even in our good thoughts, do not necessarily know what's best. And yet God does. God gives us just what we need and takes away just what he needs to accomplish in our lives what we need. And we cannot understand or fathom what God has for us. We need to be in awe of God. We need to trust God for everything in our lives. And Elihu is urging Job to understand that. He's urging Job to trust God even though he doesn't understand what's happening in his life. Even though his life is miserable physically, he still needs to trust in God. We find we could think of some questions to ask here. We could think of the story has been told of George Mueller. He was a famous orphanage director of Bristol, England. He was once asked the secret of his service. It was known far and wide that God met his needs at the orphanage without his making them known. How did he exist like this? I have read stories of Mueller where he, in the orphanage with no food on the table, thanked God for the food he was about to provide. And then a knock at the door came, and the store owner near him had extra food that he didn't know what to do with. Asked if George Mueller could use it in his orphanage. God answered his prayer, even though he did not ask God directly many times. He was known as the man of faith. How did he exist like this? The simple answer startled the questioner. Mueller replied, "There was a day when I died. I utterly died." As he spoke, he bent lower and lower until he almost touched the floor, displaying his submission before God. I died to George Mueller, his opinions, his preferences, his tastes, and will. The great man of God explained, I died to the world, its approval or censure. I died to the approval or blame even of my brethren and friends. And since then I have studied only to show myself approved unto God. That is the place that Elihu urged Job to approach, urged Job to consider in his life, urged Job to ignore what his three quote-unquote friends had said, perhaps even to consider what Elihu is saying, but then ultimately rely on God to do what's best for him. We could ask some questions tonight of ourselves. We could ask, do I understand that God has hidden from me his plan for my life? Now, God has revealed, obviously, to us many of the details as we've lived them, but truthfully, we do not know if we're going to live tomorrow or die. We do not know if God's going to bless us with riches or cause us to lose our wealth. We do not know whether God's going to give us children or take even children that we have. We do not know many things in our life. The ultimate plan for our life, we do not know at all. We might ask, do I acknowledge that God works in mysteries beyond my comprehension? God works way beyond what we can acknowledge. I remember reading one time of a couple of prisoners in Vietnam, how they had planned the following day to make their escape. That night, the guard came to them and asked, Are you too trying to escape? They thought about it, decided that they should not lie to him, and they said, "Yes, we are." The guard asked them then, "Will you take me with you?" Which they agreed to. The next day they escaped the prison. They went down to the ocean, boarded a boat, and went and sailed into the ocean to escape Vietnam. Later in that journey, they came upon a great storm and came to find out that the jailer had been an expert sailor before that. He was able to maneuver the boat to save them from sinking and dying in the storm and brought them safely to the place they were headed for. God answered their prayer. They did not know that when they said, "Yes, we are going to escape." God works in mysteries beyond our comprehension. And do I maintain a proper reverence for God? Do I revere what God has planned for me in my life? Am I trusting Him totally? I think even though I haven't and you haven't perhaps experienced the sorrow that Job experienced, the deprivation he experienced, the illness that he experienced, I think we still need to recognize we need to have a reverence for God. Do you love God? Have you thanked God for saving you? Have you thanked God for giving you your family and your possessions? Have you thanked God for loving you so much and giving you things that are way beyond what you need even? Have you thanked God for working in your life and in your heart? If you have, if you are, then it's easy for us to obey God, to do what God asks us to do, to live our lives for Him, to share His word with others around us. Truly, tonight, we need to recognize that God is in control. Do you recognize that He's in control of your life? Do we all recognize that He controls what happens to us collectively as a church? That happens to us in our families? That our life is in God's hands. And whether we live or whether we die, we do everything we do for Him. I would like to think that's true in my life. I pray that it's true. I'm afraid I don't really know if it's true until circumstances demand me to prove it. But I am thankful for what God's done in my life so far. I'm thankful for the family I have. I'm thankful for the friends I have. I'm thankful for the physical things He supplied me with. I'm thankful for Elmwood Baptist Church, which means I'm thankful for all the people that make it up. Because the church is the people, not the building. I'm thankful for the many, many blessings God's given me. I hope you are as well. I hope that tonight you can honestly say, God is in control.